Good evening and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for the webinar on collaborative problem solving presented by Dr. Jeremy Lichtman. My name is Pat Phillips and I will be your facilitator this evening. Before I introduce Dr. Lichtman, here are some housekeeping notes I'd like to make. All participants are muted. If you have a question, please type it in the bottom of your question box and click send. Also, if you have any questions after tonight's session, you can post the questions on the Wednesday webinar blog, which is accessed on our homepage under the heading Programs. The blog will be monitored for the next 7 days. Also, the New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome and Associated Disorders and its directors and employees assume no responsibility for the accuracy, completeness, objectivity, or usefulness of the information presented here today. We do not endorse any recommendation or opinion made by any member or physician, nor do we advocate any treatment. You are responsible for your own medical decisions. Now, it really is truly my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jeremy Lichtman. Dr. Lichtman is the director of Jeremy Lichtman CBT. He uses a cognitive behavioral approach to therapy and specializes in treating Tourette Syndrome, OCD, ADHD, anxiety, and depression. Dr. Lichtman also runs our parent support group, I'm happy to say, and our next one is on July 13th at 8 p.m. Dr. Lichtman, I will now turn this session over to you. Thank you so much for being here and presenting on collaborative problem solving.
Thank you so much, Pat. Very excited to be here. Okay, collaborative problem solving. What is it? Basically, collaborative problem solving is a treatment that was designed for helping children.
Excuse me, Jeremy, before you begin, part of your screen is not being seen. All of it is not being seen in your presentation.
Oh no, what's not showing?
I can only see TIVEL, just the last 4 letters of your presentation I can see.
Oh. What about now?
No.
Okay, let me see. Sorry, everyone.
We apologize.
What about now?
No, now we can see you. Thank you so much. You can see it now.
Perfect. Thank you.
Bravo.
Okay. Right. So collaborative problem solving. So this is a treatment that was designed for children, families, and schools for helping the children with behavioral difficulties. Before I jump in, kind of talk all about it, I'm going to read a short vignette, and I'm going to ask you to think about, how you would help this child, this student. And when I'm done with the presentation, I'm going to read it again, and I'm going to ask you the same question to think about how you would help this child, and maybe it will have changed, maybe not. Okay, every time Johnny comes into class after gym, he seems agitated, scowling, moving with short, tense motions. The moment he sits down in the classroom, he puts his head down. While he does stay quiet when the teacher teaches, he will usually keep his head down until the bell rings. If he is given work to complete, he will ignore it. If he is explicitly asked to do something, he'll either ignore it or sometimes respond angrily, like, "I'm not doing this stupid assignment," which will lead to an escalation if he is not ignored or if other students laugh at him when this happens. So how would you help Johnny? Okay, so our agenda for today, I'm going to start with a brief overview of sort of the types of challenges that collaborative problem solving, I'll call it CPS a lot, was designed for. The reason I'm going to be going into that is collaborative problem solving is a little bit of a study in contrast from some of the more traditional approaches. Then we're going to talk about the goals of collaborative problem solving, the 3 plans in collaborative problem solving, how it views different ways of approaching problems, and then plan B, which is the way that collaborative problem solving approaches challenging behaviors. Okay, so first, in terms of the types of diagnoses or challenges that it was designed for, so the diagnoses are oppositional defiant disorder, or ODD. So these are the kids who just don't listen. It's like, you say sit, they stand. You say stand, they're gonna sit. Conduct disorder, so these are kids with those same kind of oppositional tendencies, but a little more cruelty or meanness sometimes, right? Depression, you might be wondering why is depression here as a behavioral disorder. The reason is that younger kids often express depression through behavioral challenges, actually. Intermittent explosive disorder. So these are kids who, something sets them off. Sometimes you'll know what it is, sometimes not. They explode, and that explosion, yelling, screaming, tantruming, hitting, fighting, throwing things can last 5 minutes to, an hour maybe. And then it seems to just disappear. And often these kids will feel very, very remorseful. Autism spectrum disorder, ASD, right? So these are kids who have difficulty sort of picking up on social cues and, a lot of rigidity, difficulty with acting within the expected behavioral bounds often. And then ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, right? So these are kids who are really impulsive, right? Ooh, snow, squirrel, right? Those kind of kids. And often that can be, disruptive in and of itself, but also, if they're redirected or corrected, often there can be a lot of frustration or anger that might come after that for them. So these are the kind of diagnoses or challenges that we're looking at when we talk about, collaborative problem solving and who it's meant to help. So in terms of the traditional responses, basically, they're designed around this idea of we got to incentivize the kids, right? If we give them enough, pay them enough money, right, they'll do what we want. And so typically, right, you'll teach, as a therapist, I'll teach parents or I'll teach teachers, right, how to, create reward systems, ignore problematic behaviors, reward good ones, et cetera, et cetera. Now, here's the thing. I love these traditional approaches. I really, really do. And they work. There are decades of research showing that these work. So now you might be asking yourself, why are we talking about collaborative problem solving and not some of these more traditional responses? And there are two reasons. One, a lot of these treatments lack substantial benefit for many children, right? They don't work 100% for all children. Some children, they don't work at all. And so what that means, right, like any good, thinker, scientist, right, we want to have lots of tools in our toolbox. And so we need alternative treatments that may better help some of these kids for whom the traditional approaches don't work. So what that means is we really want to think about why. Why don't these traditional approaches work for so many kids? What might be going on? And so to help us begin to answer that question, I'm going to bring in the creator of collaborative problem solving himself, Dr. Ross Green. He's not actually here in person, obviously. So this is a YouTube video that I'm going to play for you. I believe it should work sound-wise for everyone, or at least most of you. If anyone is having any trouble, I left the URL code right there on the bottom. So you can just mute me, copy the code into your web browser and follow it there. If it's not working, and so I'll wait 15 to 30 seconds after it's done before I start talking again.
I think if you're working with kids in general, but challenging kids in particular, you need a philosophy. Who is this kid? What's he about? What's he up to? If he's up to anything, because you see your philosophy is going to guide your actions, especially when the going gets tough. No philosophy, no guide. The most important theme of collaborative problem solving is this one. Kids do well if they can. Now, nobody ever falls off their chair at the sight of kids do well if they can. It's only an earth-shattering philosophy. If you consider a much more popular alternative philosophy that floats around out there called kids do well if they wanna. No, kids do well if they can, and kids do well if they wanna are two completely different philosophies. And they have completely different ramifications for what you're going to do to or with this kid to make things better. Let's think about kids do well if they wanna for a second. If you've got a kids do well if they wanna mentality and you're working with a kid who's not doing well, then the reason you think he's not doing well by virtue of your philosophy is because he doesn't wanna. I've been thinking about kids do well if they wanna for a long time. And Here's the conclusion I've come up with about kids do all if they wanna. It's wrong. Flat out, dead wrong. I ask myself, why would any kid not want to do well? Don't all of us do the best we can in the circumstances we find ourselves in? Well, the kids do all if they want a mentality has those questions covered with concepts like secondary gain, attention seeking, unmotivated, coercive, limit testing. We're going to have those babies put to bed by around 11 a.m. this morning. When you really think about them, they don't make much sense. When you really put them to the test, they don't make a great deal of sense. But let's say they do make sense. Even if kids do well if they wanna is right, and now you know I think it's wrong, it's narrow, because you see it greatly narrows the role that you can play in the life of a kid who's not doing well. Because if you think a kid isn't doing well because he doesn't wanna, I can only think of one thing for you to do, only one role for you to play in the life of this kid, make him wanna. And we have the technology for making kids wanna. How do you make a kid wanna? You reward the behaviors you like and you punish the behaviors you don't. You give him the incentive to do well based on the belief that he didn't have the incentive to do well in the first place. And you are now in the business of making kids wanna. I sure do hope you're right about why he's not doing well. Because if you're wrong and you're busy making a kid wanna, and he already does wanna, you run the risk of making things worse, or at the very least, not being as helpful as you might have wanted to be. I'm a kids do well if they can guy. I think if this kid could do well, he would do well. Something must be getting in his way. Your role just changed. Your role just changed. You've just flipped from thinking the kid isn't doing well because he doesn't wanna, and therefore thinking that your role in the life of this kid is to make him wanna, to something a lot harder, and in my experience, a lot more productive. You've just shifted to kids do well if they can, and what's your main role now? Figure out what's getting in his way, that you can help him. You can't help him if you don't know what's getting in his way. Biggest favor you can do a challenging kid is to finally, at long last, be the person who figures out what's getting in his way. Because you see, if he's still challenging, pretty surefire bet. Nobody's figured it out yet. The key theme of collaborative problem solving, the key philosophy, if you remember nothing else from everything I say, I hope you remember that if this kid could do well, he would do well, because kids do well if they can.
All right. Go wait another 20, 30 seconds for anyone who may be watching the video on YouTube. Okay, awkward silence over. Everyone can take a deep breath, let out the breath that they were holding. We're all okay. Kids do well if they can. Kids do well if they can. What a powerful idea. And I agree with Dr. Green there. If you walk out with nothing else from this presentation, kids do well if they can. Because if nothing else, it will allow you to connect so much more with the children in your life. So with that in mind, let's talk about the goals of intervention from a collaborative problem-solving perspective. And there's three main goals. First, dramatically reduce the challenging behaviors, right? Let's get those to happen less. Two, help adults pursue their expectations. That might seem obvious, but as we move along and we get to the first step of Plan B, a lot of adults might be like, wait, but what about me? What about what we need as the adults, as the parents, as the teachers, as the doctors, right? So it's really important to recognize that this is a key goal of collaborative problem solving, help adults pursue their expectation. And last is teach cognitive skills that are lacking, right? So this gets to what Dr. Green was saying at the end of, right, once we change our attitude to kids do well if we can, now we need to understand why they aren't, what's getting in the way, and these cognitive skills. And the idea is that when kids are having behavioral difficulties, explosive behaviors, according to the philosophy of collaborative problem solving, is that there is a brick wall that is being hit between the expectations of the adults, the parents, the teachers in their lives, and their capabilities, right? And think about it. If you're trying to get somewhere, you're sitting in traffic and you just want to get somewhere, what happens? Anger starts to rise, right? Honking, yelling, screaming, all of that stuff that we teach our kids that they shouldn't do, that we all do when we're in the car and stuck in traffic. So what are these lagging skills? So there are 5 kind of lagging skills that we look at. There's what's called executive skills or executive functioning skills, right? These are the skills that help us organize information, be able to follow directions. Language processing skills. These are the skills that allow us to understand what people are saying to us and parse the information, as well as communicate effectively what we are thinking, feeling, doing, etc. Emotion regulation skills are the ability to recognize our own emotions and self-soothe and tolerate distress. There's cognitive flexibility skills. So these are the skills that are involved in being able to shift tasks, right? Move from one thing to another. And then the last is social skills, right? The ability to pick up on the social world around us and act effectively within that world, right? And so the idea that kids with explosive behaviors are lacking one or more of those key skill areas. Okay, so the 3 plans of collaborative problem solving. So I mentioned, right, collaborative problem solving is a little bit of a study in contrast. So the only one that's a CPS plan is Plan B, but we have to understand Plan A and Plan C first. So what is Plan A? Plan A is when we as the adults insist that our expectations be met. Go to bed, eat your dinner, do your homework, right? Sit still in class, right? Raise your hand when you want to talk, right? Don't hit the other kids, right? All reasonable things, right? But the problem is, for the type of kids that we're talking about here, Plan A tends to intensify those explosive behaviors, right? Because we're asking kids to do something that they are not capable in that moment of doing. So we need to ask ourselves, can the kid meet these expectations? We're not going to do Plan A, right? By the time we're done with this presentation, 8:30, no one here is ever going to do Plan A again. Joking, obviously, well, we will, but right, no Plan A. Plan C. Plan C is what I like to think of as Dudley parenting. So for anyone who's read the Harry Potter series, Harry Potter's cousin, Dudley, is a real spoiled brat. And there's a scene in the first chapter of the first book, second chapter, sorry, where Dudley is sitting at the kitchen table, counting the mound of presents sitting on top of the table for his birthday. He's counting them, he gets like number 36, and then he goes, last year, I got 37. And his Aunt Petunia, his mother, sorry, Harry's Aunt Petunia, notices, right, his anger starts to rise, and to stop a tantrum from happening, she immediately jumps in and says, and we're gonna get you 2 more presents, right? Now you're gonna have 39, right? And he calms down, right? Removes any expectation for Dudley to be able to tolerate having less presents, right? And so Plan C is really, really good at reducing the global levels of frustration and fights. However, parent expectations are not being met, and the child's not learning any skills, right? So what we need is something different. We need a way of helping meet both parent expectations and helping the child, and that's Plan B. Plan B involves working collaboratively with the child to develop a mutually satisfactory solution to an unsolved problem. An unsolved problem is basically, the idea is that problems are predictable, right? We actually are, if we assess carefully, we'll know where those brick walls are, right? And so we have these unsolved problems, and by resolving these factors, right, child or adult, right, that are interfering with the expectations being met, right? Working with the child. Okay, so that's all well and good. So real quick, if you want to look at a handy dandy chart about what's being achieved by these different plans, plan A, pursue expectations, maybe if it's working. Plan C, reduce outbursts, probably going to do that. Plan B, we'll be doing all three. Reducing outbursts, pursuing expectations, and teaching the child skills. So how do we do that? How do we achieve this wonderful, wonderful trifecta of meeting parent expectations, reducing outbursts, and teaching skills? So it starts with the idea that in Plan B, as the adults, we are the surrogate frontal lobe, right? We are going to be modeling and teaching flexibility, frustration tolerance, problem-solving skills. And the goals that are being accomplished by acting as a surrogate frontal lobe, right? So the frontal lobe is the part of the brain that's responsible for executive functioning, decision-making, all of that higher level thinking type skills that these children are often lacking. It helps walk the child through these frustrating situations in the present, right? So we'll get a little bit more into that soon. By solving these problems routinely, we're also precipitating, right? We are stopping beforehand these explosive behaviors or these explosive episodes from happening, right? We're coming up with a plan, we're doing it beforehand. With multiple repetitions, right? We're teaching these lacking cognitive skills, right? So that eventually we won't need to be the surrogate frontal lobe anymore. And so I said before, right? Unsolved problems are predictable, right? So Plan B is a proactive treatment, right? We're not jumping in the middle of an outburst in Plan B. We are recognizing, we're doing some detective work to figure out what are the lacking skills, what are these unsolved problems, and then working proactively with the child. And so Plan B is consisted of 3 steps: empathy, define the problem, and the invitation. So we're going to get into really, really nitty-gritty details of all of these in just a moment. But before we do, just some other basic ingredients to think about that we need to keep in mind when we're doing a Plan B collaborative problem-solving discussion. 1, both parties need to remain calm. Can't have a Plan B discussion when everyone's yelling at each other, right? So that means as the adults, you have to make sure that you're in a place where you can hear uncomfortable information, things that you might not like, and keep your cool, right? We need to ensure that the both parties that the concerns of both parties are clearly defined and considered. So what this means is that, right, we're going to have to get really, really clear about what is getting in the way for the child via the empathy step, which we'll get into soon, and what is going on for the parents via the define the problem step. We also want to make sure that when we get to the invitation step, actually coming up with solutions, we're going to be willing to entertain a wide possible set of solutions that address both the parent and the child's concerns, right? And so these ingredients are captured in these 3 steps: empathy, define the problem, and invitation. 2 more quick things to keep in mind with collaborative problem solving is that we don't need to get all 3 of these steps done in one go, right? As a parent, you don't need to sit down and do all 3, one and done. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but sometimes the goal at the beginning is just to get your kid to start talking, just to get the child to start talking with you about what is going on for them. And the last thing before we move on is these steps need to be done in order. So a lot of times when I do collaborative problem solving with families, we have a great session, everyone's on board, right? They practice at home, they come back and didn't work. One of the things I always ask is, well, what order did you do it in? They'll be like, the parents will say, well, I started telling them why it was a problem that they're exploding, and I'm like, ah! Skip the empathy step. Like, but I did that. I'm like, did you do it first? No. the order is really important here. Okay, so step 1, empathy. So the goals of the empathy step are develop the clearest sense possible of what the child's concerns are, or what their perspectives are, and have the child feel listened to and therefore comfortable enough to start talking. Basically, when I teach parents how to do the empathy step, I'm teaching them how to be mini therapists, right? In order to be a good therapist, I need my clients need to know that I care about what they're saying, and that they're not going to be judged, and that they're not going to be kicked out, and they're not going to be told why they're wrong. In fact, I have horror stories from some of my clients where they left old therapists because that's exactly what was going on, right? And that is what routinely goes on in the life of a child. Their concerns are relegated to, you're just a little kid, right? We're not consciously doing that. We're not, but we're doing it all the time, right? We're busy lives and we need things done. But what that means is our kids are not feeling heard, and they often are so afraid to bring up what's going on for them, their fears, right? What they're worried about, because they believe that they're not going to be listened to, and in fact, that they will get in trouble if they share what is bothering them. In fact, it's one of the things that when I start with a new child, when I do my intake, I have a few rules, and one of the rules I tell every kid I work with is that no matter what they share with me in my office, they cannot get in trouble for it, because they're not going to share if they believe they're going to get in trouble. So how do we do it, right? It's nice and good to say, all right, let's be really empathetic and let's hear what the child has to say. But now we need to know how to do it. And what it is we start with a neutral observation followed by a very, very simple 2-word question. What's up? So for example, so the parent, it's the client I had, a parent talking to their child. I've noticed that when you're told you can't have a play date, you seem to get upset and start to say that you never get what you want. What's up? What's up? Those 2 words can change a child's life. Okay, but it doesn't stop then. We need to keep asking questions until we, as the adults, have a clear sense of what is going on, right? Who, what, where, when, who's causing the problem for them, where is it happening, school versus home, what is going on? And so the way we get the answers to these questions is we ask clarifying questions. How so? I don't understand. Could you share a little bit more about that? Right? Gentle, open-ended questions. Right? That's why what's up is so powerful, right? There is no designation, it is the ocean. And for a kid to feel heard, we need to give them the space to fill in what is going on, right? So open-ended, gentle questions. We also want to look at the relevant environmental circumstances, right? Where is it happening, right? What is different about the environment? Sometimes it can be as simple as the bedroom versus the living room, but school versus the bus versus the car, right? All things we need to try to understand. We also want to break what the child is saying up to us into components, right? This is how we want to try to understand it, right? When X happens, right? When you say you can't have a play date, you think Y, right? So here the child might be sharing what they're thinking, which leads to Q, certain emotions and certain behaviors. And the reason we want to, right, with this breaking into components, we want to keep thinking, right? What is it we don't yet understand? And really important is we want to know the thoughts the child is having. And I don't say it's more important than the feelings because the thoughts are more important than feelings. They are absolutely not. But we are already addressing the feelings by being gentle, by having empathy. But we want to get a sense of the thought, right? We need to understand, because how a child is looking at and understanding a circumstance or situation is going to color how they feel, which is going to color and affect how they act. Some other key factors to keep in mind. You want to stay with an empathy step until you're pretty sure you have a good understanding of the child's concern, right? So when you're asking questions, you're also listening to the answers, both so you can understand, and so the child, again, I know I keep saying it, so the child can feel heard. So that means we can't be mechanical, we can't rush it, right? And so sometimes this step, the empathy step, is all you can do in a single sitting, right? And that's okay, right? That's okay, right? Sometimes you might need to do it more than once, just the empathy step. Until a child feels heard, they're not going to be able to work on solving a problem, right? I am a cognitive behavioral therapist. I am solution oriented, and I do not start trying to solve problems with my clients until I believe and they've shared that they feel safe and heard. So what are some of these situations where we might just stick with the empathy step and not move on? Well, that's based on the child's responses. So what are some possible child responses? Maybe we get an answer. Woohoo! That's awesome. That's what we want. Here's the thing. 9 out of 10 times on the first go, you're not going to get an answer. Maybe you'll get silence, head down. Maybe with a slight shoulder shrug. Maybe you'll get you'll get lucky, you'll get a more verbal, I don't know. One of my favorites, that ain't problem for me. Always have to wonder if it's really not for the child, but that's a possible response, right? Or you get defensiveness, right? This is stupid, right? Or this is not a problem for me, right? So let's think for a second about what these possible responses might mean. So with the silence and the I don't know, he really might not know. He really might not yet know what is going on for him. That's why this empathy step is so important. We are there at the surrogate frontal lobe to help the child understand his own behaviors, thoughts, and feelings. That requires patience. He might not know how to respond. Maybe this child, your child, this student, has never been asked this before. It's always been, you need to. Why do you do this? Never, what is going on for you when this happens? Maybe he needs it broken down into smaller parts, right? To fully understand. Again, some of these lagging cognitive skills might mean he needs what we're sharing as the problem, that first observation, broken up into smaller parts. Maybe he just needs some time to think. At a certain point with the silences or the I don't know, that's not a problem with me, you can start making some educated guesses, some hypothesis testing, but it's super important when you do that you remain neutral. And you're willing and ready to retract what your idea was if the child denies it, right? We're not here in the empathy step to tell a child what he's thinking or what he's feeling, right? We're here to understand from the child. And sometimes they might need help, right? With you saying, when you had that reaction, it looked like you were really angry. And if he says, I wasn't angry, okay. So, all right, let's try again. So if it wasn't anger, whether it may be sadness, whether it may be frustration, right? Let the child know that you're not insisting. And for defensiveness, by the way, this is info about the concern right there, right? This is information. Lap it up and be prepared to give reassurance, right? That this is not, moving straight into, telling him what to do, right? I'm not telling you what to do. You're not in trouble, right? That is a big thing with defensiveness, is we need to be ready to retract and be like, I'm not here to tell you what to do right now. I'm here to understand. And so then last is we end this step with a re-emphasis on the child's concern. So you're upset because you feel that everyone else in the family gets what they want all the time, but you never get what you want. Think about that for a second. Whether or not it's true, if a child believes that everyone else in the family gets what they want and they never do, of course they're going to feel horrible. If they don't have the skills to effectively communicate that, what are they left with but exploding? I know a lot of time spent on the empathy step, but that's because this is so crucial. So what are some common impediments? So one is perception of Plan B as capitulation, right? So many of the parents I work with, when they hear me talking about this, especially the empathy step, I'm just giving in to my kid. And here's the thing, it's not. Plan B, the empathy step, is neither agreement nor disagreement. It's a way to keep the child calm and ensure that his concerns are heard, not capitulation. We'll get into soon even more so why that's not the case. That's really important because if as adults we are going in with our hackles raised, ready to be told, just that, then we're not going to function well either. Another one is using assumptions, right? So this often is the case when we pull from our own experiences, and this is like we're really, our heart's in the best place, right? But we're using our own experiences, right? Something like, I didn't always like my food, the food that my mom cooked for me either, right? If there's a fight around eating dinner, right? But maybe he's not eating because his stomach hurts after the bus ride home from school, right? It has nothing to do with the type of food, right? Or we're assuming that we know how the child is feeling, right? You must be feeling very angry, but maybe he's actually feeling really sad. So we have to be careful with assumptions. Poor use of tone, being belittling, angry, sarcastic, right? I'll sometimes have parents practice in front of a mirror, the tone that they use, and even record themselves. And lastly, using empathy to segue into plan one, right? So, sorry, plan A, right? Notice that you slam the cabinets in the kitchen when you're looking for food. That's an unacceptable way to let us know you're hungry, right? So those are some of the common impediments. Okay, empathy step done. You're rock stars, you got it, kid feels heard. Now it's on to the define the problem step. And the goal of this step is to ensure that as the adult, your concerns are presented and heard. So how do we do it? We share what is going on as the adult. The thing is, using the example from before, right, we already had plans when you asked to have that play date. Or my concern is that you'll become upset when your friends have to leave and then you'll take that out on your sisters, right? This is why it's a problem for you guys as the adult, and the child does need to hear this. Because if the child doesn't hear it, how are they supposed to help you come up with a solution? How are you supposed to help them, right? One that addresses both the child's concerns and your concerns as adult. So what are some of the common impediments? Some of the common impediments are one, dueling solutions. So this is the idea that when we express our concerns to the child, we're not expressing them as concerns, but as demands, right? Instead of the thing is we already had plans when you have to have that play date is, well, we had plans, so you have to suck it up, right? And often that will lead the child to then double down on what they want, and no one's going to hear each other, dueling solutions as opposed to searching for a mutually satisfactory collaborative solution. Lack of clarity, right? So does your kid understand what you're asking, what you're saying? So remember, this is an iterative process. You're probably not going to get it right on your first try. And if the problem is that your child, the kid, doesn't understand your concern or you weren't clear about it, that's going to come up when you use plan B the next time on the unsolved problem, right? Because if they didn't understand it, the solution probably isn't going to work. This is going to come up when you try it and it doesn't work. Last possible impediment is the kid doesn't care. Here's the thing, he doesn't have to. The kid doesn't need to share your concerns. You do need to hear his concerns and actually care as the adults in the room. He doesn't need to, but he does need to recognize them as part of the problem-solving process, which leads to the last step, the invitation. So the goal of the invitation is to brainstorm together a solution that is realistic and will meet the concerns of both parties and will be mutually satisfactory. All right, it's going to meet the concerns and be mutually satisfactory. So for example, going back to so how does that work? Right, so sorry, getting a little confused with my notes, I apologize. So the way this works is that, right, if you look at the how-to, right, it starts with a recap of both concerns, right? So, so you feel like everyone else in the family always gets what they want, that you never get anything that you want, and you get bored on the weekend. Meanwhile, I, the parent, worry that we have plans that we have already committed to, or that you'll become upset when your friends leave and that you'll take it out on your sisters. I wonder if there's a way we can make sure you feel that you can get what you want and feel listened to, but also keep your commitments, and also keep and we can keep our commitments and help you stay calm when you have play dates and your friends leave. Okay, so here are some important points about that. How does that actually work? So the first is we want to let the child have the first stab at solving the problem, right? Asking them if they have any ideas, right? And what you guys are going to be doing, I often teach parents to kind of go back and forth. Each one comes up with an idea, right? And you're keeping track of all of the ideas. And you're not even going to look at how good or bad any of the ideas are at first. You're going to try to create as comprehensive a list and as many possible ideas as possible. If the child, by the way, doesn't have any possible solutions, right, you can say, maybe I have some thoughts, I'm going to share them. Right, letting the kid know that, you're solving it with him, right? If things are going off track, you always want to return and reemphasize the true concerns already noted, right? Always return to the true concerns, the child's and yours, if it feels like things are going off track. And then we want to end with an agreement that we're pretty sure has a 60 to 70% chance of working, right? How do you know that? You're not going to know that perfectly, right? But that's what we're looking for, is a 60 to 70% chance of it going to work. And so what happens is after you come up with the solution, right? You have a whole list. You go through them, you say which ones do you think are going to work or not, right? And then you pick one and you give it a shot. And you agree to return to the conversation, to have another Plan B conversation in a week, a few days, to see how it goes, right? That's really, really important, right? You gotta have to see how it goes. So what are some of the things that get in the way here? So one, parents, adults, we return to Plan A, right? Maybe we're tired, maybe we're frustrated, maybe we don't believe the child can come up with an adequate solution, right? We need to be aware of the adults of not returning to Plan A, because we return to Plan A, any traction we've gained with the kid, they're going to shut down, back to square one. What if there's difficulty with generating solutions? So that goes back to what I was saying about, you just try to come up with as many as possible, and you come up with some silly ones, right? When I work with families and I'm part of the process, I'll often, come up with solutions. So the play date one, maybe I'll say something like, maybe, Johnny gets to have friends over whenever he wants, or his best friend just sleeps over always, so he never has to leave, right? He gets a friend all the time, not gonna take out on his sisters, right? Problem solved. And everyone usually knows that that's really jokey. It breaks the ice a little bit, and it allows ideas to start flowing. Right, unrealistic solutions, right? That's another possible impediment, right? So not feasible and not mutually satisfactory. So here, right, if it's not feasible, as a parent, you might want to say, well, there's an idea, but I'm not sure I or you will be able to do our part, your part, a lot of the time. So let's see if we can look at some of the others. Not mutually satisfactory, you might want to say something like, so that solution works for you, but it wouldn't work well for me. Let's see if we can, look at some of the others we come up with. So again, the goal, right, in using this 3-step process, empathy, define the problem, the invitation is that child's concerns are noted and met, parents' concerns are noted and met, and we're teaching these lagging skills, right? So in terms of executive functioning skills, right, we're increasing the child's ability for planful thinking, and he can also learn how to anticipate his own triggers and develop solutions. Language processing, right? Learns appropriate emotional expression. Emotion regulation, right? Reduction in these kind of difficulties. The child will learn how to self-soothe and will learn that not every situation is going to lead to them being completely ignored or not listened to, and they don't need to explode in order to get their emotions recognized. The empathy step there again, that's very soothing. Increase their ability to think in less black and white and intense ways, and developing those social skills for navigating, right, those difficult situations appropriately, right? And it's taught through the natural environment by doing collaborative problem solving. Here are some resources. The first 3 are books by Ross Green. The other 2 are his websites. One is more about school, one more for family. But I want to return to that vignette I read a little bit. I read before at the beginning of this presentation about 45 minutes ago. I'm going to ask you to pause again and think, how would you approach this problem now after I gave this little talk? Every time Johnny comes into class after gym, he seems agitated, scowling, moving with short, tense motions. The moment he sits down in the classroom, he puts his head down. While he does stay quiet when the teacher teaches, he will usually keep his head down until the bell rings. If he is given work to complete, he will ignore it. If he is explicitly asked to do something, he will either ignore it or sometimes respond angrily, "I'm not doing this stupid assignment," which can lead to an escalation if he is not ignored, or if the other students laugh at him when this happens. So thinking about the idea of kids do well if they can, would you approach this child any differently? Will you work to try to understand what is getting in Johnny's way with these expectations? What are the lacking skills? How is he not being heard? And how can we help Johnny and all the other Johnnies in our families, in our schools, in our institutions, recognize that they matter and that we believe that they can do well? And it is our job as the adults to give them the space to express themselves so that we can help them learn those skills so that they can do well. All right, thank you so much. I know that there's a little time for Q&A now, so I think I did pretty well on time. So,
yeah, excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Lichtman. That was wonderful, so informative, and just what an approach to working with your children. Thank you for sharing that. And we do have a few questions here. And I remind everyone, if you have a question, to please type it in the question box and just hit send. So one of the questions we have here, Dr. Lichtman, is, what does CBS suggest you do in the middle of a meltdown or tantrum?
That's an excellent question, right? Okay, it's all well and good to plan in advance, right? But what about when we're in the middle of one? So this, I actually think, is a real weakness of the collaborative problem-solving approach. There is something called emergency plan B that they talk about in the literature, but the research doesn't really support it. And this, I want to be clear, collaborative problem solving is an evidence-based treatment. It has been shown to work. For problems that are showing up in the moment, though, it's not as effective. And typically, I actually say we want to fall back on plan C, right? As long as it's not super dangerous, right? We kind of let the tantrum happen, take a step back, right? And then when everyone's calm again, later, right, we want to get back and say, so I noticed that X, Y, and Z, right? What's up?
Thank you for that answer. Also, here we have another question here. What if both the parent and the child are having difficulties coming up with a solution? What do you do then in that situation on both sides, not able to come to a solution?
Right. So what if there's all those problems with actually coming up with a solution, right? Both parent and child are stuck. So a few things. One, you hire the professional. I'm only somewhat kidding when I say that. But one is, right, this is where having a specialist, right, whether it's a therapist, a guidance counselor in a school, right, other adults in the child's life, asking them for help too. I think it's really important that the adult to be able to say, hey, I'm also having a lot of trouble. This is a really, really stuck problem, right? And then you want to maybe return to, right, the empathy and the define the problem step, right? Really dive a little bit deeper into what is getting in the way, right? And often if you can't think of a solution, it might be that we don't really have a good understanding of the problem. So, go back to the empathy step and the define the problem step. Or, right, we might just need to take a break. Say, all right, you know what? Child feels heard, you put your concerns out there. Let's take a step back. Let's think a little bit more about this, and let's kind of come back in a little while. So yeah, that's what I would recommend there.
Great. This is, I had a teenager once before. My son's a grown now, but someone has a question here. My son is so rigid. How will CBS work for him? And he is 16. And I know those teenagers can be quite something.
Yeah, I actually think this solution is this process, these type of the Plan B works really well with teenagers actually, because teenagers so badly want to be heard, right? It's all they want sometimes. So if your child is so rigid, right, you really want to slow down and dive in deep into the empathy step. If the child feels heard, if your child feels heard, they are much more likely to be able to let go of some of that rigidity. Right? Rigidity is often a defensiveness around feeling unheard and that the feelings and thoughts are not being taken into account or appreciated. So there, I really think you need to dive deep into the empathy step, and I think if you do, you'll find that your child is actually much more willing to hear possible solutions that that maybe they wouldn't have been able to before. Yeah.
Okay, good. And at what age can you start practicing CBS with a child?
I think, depends on the abilities of the child and everything, but probably not younger than 7, 8 or 9, right? 7 to 9, I would say, depending on the maturity and capability of the child. 7 to 9.
Okay. All right, I'm trying to read this question here. It says also, when I do acknowledge his feelings, I think it's the same parent. It's like, also when I do acknowledge his feelings and use empathy, he can be very defensive. He can be very manipulative. That's what it is. When I acknowledge his feelings and use empathy, he can be manipulative.
So maybe. I don't know your personal circumstances. It's hard for me to say very clearly to a sort of very, to what you're saying without knowing more. But typically when I hear that, what typically I find is happening is that there is not a lot of the empathy going on, right? Or the kids feel that it's a very phoned in kind of empathy, right? And so it goes back to that sort of, trying to manipulate. But here's the thing, typically if a kid is so rigid, their ability to manipulate is not going to be very strong, right? Because those skills, the ability to manipulate people, right? They're just reacting, and they're reacting emotionally usually, right? And so if they're reacting emotionally to your empathy, that's where you need to weather the storm, right? You need to be a rock in the midst of a raging ocean. It's a lot. It is asking a lot from parents, right? The reality is, right, this is the job of the parents, right? And if you can withstand that emotional response, the expression, the anger that might come out of that, and show that you're still there, I think you'll find a lot of that manipulation is actually starting to fade away.
Thank you. Another question here. What if, this is a good one, what if the parents don't agree on using CBS for their child's explosive and problematic behaviors?
So if the parents don't want to, then it's not going to work, right? And now the question is why, right? If a parent's not willing to, why, right? Do they see it as capitulation, right? If they see this whole process as capitulation, it totally makes sense why a parent wouldn't want to do it, right? You know, if it's all about kid gets to be heard, kid gets what they want, right? I wouldn't want to use something like this either, right? So if you're a medical professional or someone in that kind of line, or a teacher, and you're trying to help parents with this, right? You need to sell them on it then and explain that it's not that, right? So a lot of it depends on why the parents are unwilling to. Yeah, depends on why the parents are unwilling to. But I think a lot of it goes back to really thinking about like, well, why, right? And trying to understand that. You know, again, if I don't know, if you're a medical professional working with parents or teacher, right? Empathy step, right? I would never use this. It's not going to work. Right, so right, you're saying that you have all these behavioral challenges that come up in the home, child gets whatever, you know, and that you're, you know, this wouldn't work or you're not willing to do this. What's up?
Here's another one. Here's another question. It's actually very interesting. I was thinking about this myself, this question. It says CBS is collaborative and a proactive solutions, right? And isn't it for all kids, not just neurodivergence?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I don't even know that when we look at some of these diagnoses that I looked at earlier, right, that these have to be diagnostic stuff or that they have to be neurodivergent, right? Like, kids do well as they can, right? What a powerful idea. Let's apply it to all kids. All kids, every kid in the classroom, every kid in the family, right? Yeah, you could use this with anyone. Something that I plan on using with my own children, right? I want my kids to be able to think, you know, clearly about their problems, express their emotions, right? You know, that empathy step is something that I plan on having part and parcel of my life with my kids always, right? So yes, absolutely, use it with every, yes, please use it with every kid.
Use it with every kid, right? Yeah. And oh, what if a child doesn't want to have a CBS conversation, a CPS conversation? What if they don't want to even engage? Where do you start?
So again, kind of need to get a sense of why. And sometimes you just have to work really slow. Sometimes the only thing you can do is sit down, say, I notice X, Y, and Z, what's up? And that might be as far as you get. That's okay. You keep coming back, right? You need to keep coming back in this calm, empathic, caring way. Because often if a kid doesn't want to get involved in it, time and time again, I see this, they don't believe that you as a parent are actually invested. They don't think you care, right? They think, right, you're going to just go straight back into plan A, right? And so you need to keep trying to show the kid that you are there.
Good recommendation, good advice. Thank you so much, Dr. Lichtman. We appreciate it. We've actually come to the end of our session. I asked that if there weren't any questions, or if you have a question, you think about it later tonight as you're trying to navigate some things with your child, you know, please go to our Wednesday webinar blog on our website under the program heading and leave your questions there. As I said, the webinar blog will be managed for the next 7 days so we can continue to carry on this conversation online. Thank you again tonight for being here, Dr. Lichtman. We so appreciate you. Your wealth of knowledge that you bring to this is incredible. We appreciate it. And I want to thank everyone for joining our webinar this evening on collaborative problem solving. There is an exit survey, so we would like you to please take a moment to fill that out. That really helps us as we inform and make decisions about our programming, particularly our webinar programming. The webinar blog is now available and will be open for the next 7 days, as I mentioned, and also an archive recording of tonight's webinar will be on our website as well. Our next presentation will be on organizational skills presented by Dr. Richard Gallagher, and this will be on September 21st. We take a break in July and August, but We will be back in the fall with a new webinar lineup with some new exciting topics, and we ask you to please join us. But during the summer, we will also have our Tourette Talk sessions. Tourette Talk is a similar format, but it's on Zoom. We ask you to join us then. The next one is July 21st, and it will be facilitated by psychotherapist Gail Foreman. And the topic is keeping your relationship intact in the midst of raising a child with TS. So it's all about keeping your relationship healthy with your significant other while you're raising a child with a chronic condition. So I think that would be a wonderful conversation to have with Dr. Gail Foreman at that point. So we thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. We look forward to starting our Wednesday webinar series again in the fall. And check out Tourette Talk and our other programming on our website at njcts.org. Thank you, everyone. Pleasure to have you.